Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, The Modern Challenge in Enterprise Testing. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's webinar. Today's webinar will last for approximately 45 minutes, with 15 minutes at the end for your questions. You'll have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenter by typing them into the questions pane of the control panel. And the control panel is situated on the right-hand side of your screen. You can send these questions at any time. We will collect your questions and address these during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Following the webinar, we will send you the recording of today's presentation. So without further ado, I'd now like to introduce you to today's presenter, Simon Evans from Xperia, a Qualitest company. So over to you, Simon.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Welcome, everyone. Obviously, today's topic, modern challenge in enterprise testing. What I'm hoping to get across and hopefully spark a bit of debate and thought from your side, some of the challenges that companies are facing with lots of different technologies. It's quite an exciting time in the market as integration is getting more and more complex. So I'll start with a couple of introductions. Myself, Simon Evans, I was part of the foundation of Xperia back in 2002. I come from a SAP background. I used to implement SAP, I used to be a basis technology consultant and got into performance and optimization, tuning, etc. And that brought me into the testing world. When we talk about SAP, really what we're talking about is the entire enterprise landscape, the whole technology stack. It's not just about those SAP applications. It's a very diverse landscape out there. Just a little bit about Qualitest. Qualitest is a pure play organization purely focused on testing and different testing solutions, and we're the world's second largest of those pure play companies, working with lots of different organizations and certainly in the area that I work in, focusing very much on large enterprise. It's very much about business assurance, and I'll touch a bit more on that in terms of how we tackle the sort of challenges our customers face. We pride ourselves on innovation and finding new ways of tackling different technologies and new ways in which we can make testing more efficient. And as such, we do a lot of engagements that are around outcome-based testing or point-based testing, rather than just the sort of traditional T&M or fixed-price types of engagements. And we offer a lot of managed testing services for customers. We're a global organisation with offshore centres in India. We've got bases across Israel, the US, and UK, and the rest of Europe. So, as Sarah mentioned, she mentioned Xperia, a Qualitest organisation. Xperia is a pure SAP and enterprise testing organisation. We were acquired by Qualitest 6 months ago. We work very, very closely with SAP themselves across their customer base, supporting various technologies, and especially when the new technologies kick in. We're very much focused obviously around the testing piece, but about user experience, and by that we're not just talking about end users, we're talking about customers, we're talking about vendors, we're talking about internal users, the entire landscape across any organisation. And we're really focused on reducing the cost of testing. This is one of the biggest challenges that we'll touch on today. And you know, there's lots of different ways in which we can tackle testing. We can throw lots of bodies at it, but actually, how do we find the most efficient, fastest, and cost-effective route through? One of the biggest challenges in the enterprise space is the digital transformation. So it's no longer about digital front ends living in relative isolation. It's no longer about ERP and back-end systems. It's really pulling together both back, middle and front office systems, and that level of integration is what is causing the biggest challenges at the moment. And obviously all organisations want to be able to accelerate change, so whether it's by adopting Agile or moving into DevOps, or even just sticking with waterfall approaches for some of these systems, but trying to accelerate the rate of change. Testing traditionally hasn't really evolved that much, and actually it should have done. Testing shouldn't be a blocker to change. It should be part of that acceleration process. If we can be targeted, if we can be quick, if we can ensure the quality, we can have a significant contribution to speeding through the process of change. As an organisation, we work across all different industry verticals. I suppose we have a big focus around retail, utilities, and consumer packaged goods industries, but it pretty much spans everywhere. Really what we're about is getting into that integrated enterprise. So when I talk about enterprise, we'll talk about SAP at times. It's really looking across that entire landscape, as I said earlier. So enough about Experian Qualitest. One of the topics that I speak to customers about a lot, and I tend to engage with our large enterprise customers and help them tackle some of the challenges that they see out there, is around the overall cost of testing. Large organizations may have worked in silos. They invariably have large offshore teams in place, and they've been trying to tackle the cost of testing by being as cost efficient as they can with the resources they use. But the amount of testing that is going on is going through the roof, so they're in this continuous testing cycle already, and then you have the challenges of DevOps and Agile, which is increasing that testing activity. Great for testers, but keeping control of your costs and making everything efficient is very difficult. I have a lot of customers that are talking about test centers of excellence. They want to go down that route, or they're finding it's a very expensive route to go down. And actually, how do they find ways to reduce the cost and effort without impacting quality? And quite often there's no incentives there for the partners involved to reduce the amount of effort they're doing. They're not able to test everything, so it becomes very much around risk management. But how do you manage risk if you don't necessarily have the business impact knowledge within your test team? You can use tools. A lot of it's done by business analysts, but it's not necessarily bedded into the methodologies and processes people are going through, and quite often that leads to blanket coverage type of testing rather than an intelligent, smart approach. Automation, unfortunately, is very often poorly designed, and I'm sure for those of you that have been involved in automation, you'll have seen a number of different examples. A lot of effort goes in. It all looks shiny and exciting when it's first there, but very quickly it becomes expensive to maintain, quite often is too slow either to set up before each execution, or the execution itself is taking far too long. And then that increasingly complex landscape. Lots of different applications, siloed skills within all of the teams, let alone the test teams. And actually, how do you get that knowledge in there that takes the data that's flowing through that front, middle, back office type of integration? It's no longer just about testing specific applications. And then the big one that quite often goes unanswered is around your environments and data. How do we manage that? How do we manage with accurate but scrambled data? Very few test environments actually live with scrambled data. So what is it that we're trying to tackle here? Well, one is moving on to what we badge as the industrialization phase, which is really just looking at what volume can we push through our test teams. What's the cheapest way we can do it? Is it just by throwing everything offshore? And are we setting up the best model for that? If we're just doing blanket testing through that way, whilst we may get the benefits, the economies of offshore resources, if we're having to double or treble the size of our team, it's counterproductive. So we've got to look at techniques to improve the velocity. We've got to improve the speed, and it's got to be targeted, which is why we focus on this word velocity. We want to test fast, and we want to be able to fail fast and tap into those other buzzwords of shift left. How do we do things earlier? How do we move away from big test activities, things like performance, which is vital, but quite often is a big, expensive exercise, and somehow we've got to move it into a fast, agile approach to doing performance. And then we also have a wealth of information at our fingertips, again, which is rarely used. Everyone talks about analytics in every other part of the business. You know, we've got the data there, not just about testing stats. We've got data there which is telling us about the health of our projects and programs and the different teams that are getting involved. So we've got that continuous feedback loop there, and we should be using it. So in terms of the challenge, and a specific challenge that we've got with customers is the journey that they're going through. Now, whether this is SAP or Oracle or any other enterprise application suite, the story is pretty much the same. Historically, we've got something like SAP ECC sitting at the core of their business, hooked into various different legacy applications. Invariably, it's on-premise or in some kind of hosted data center with one of their partners. Now, what the enterprise vendors are wanting to do is start shifting people obviously onto their latest technology sets, and this is a big challenge because more often than not organizations are far behind in whatever support stack or enhancement pack in the case of SAP. So actually that journey to get onto the latest versions is very, very long. It involves lots of redevelopment and it involves lots of testing as a consequence, and that journey can take organizations literally years to actually get to where they want to be. Now, the likes of SAP want to start pushing people onto cloud. Part of the reason for that is as you move on to cloud, and if we're using SAP HANA as an example, there's a big drive to do away with some of the customizations and move on to more vanilla or standard configuration. There's huge benefit in doing that, and customers are wanting to go that route, but the big advantage to someone like SAP is that once you're in that position, they can start to enforce, in a nice way, but enforce some of the changes and the enhancement packs down onto those cloud instances, which means the customers are very much up to date and can adopt new technologies much, much quicker. So there's SAP's business case for doing that kind of approach. The big challenge there is the amount of testing that comes in, and a little while ago, probably 6 months ago, I had one of our large enterprise customers contact me and say, you know, what do you know about the concept of evergreen? And as we sort of explored the concept more, and we explored some of the challenges they've got with their on-premise applications and applications they've got hosted in the cloud, whether it's SAP or not, so the likes of Salesforce or whether it's some of the SAP SuccessFactors, etc. And it really started to present a number of challenges that they hadn't foreseen. So what do we mean about evergreen? So if we've got a scenario where they've got some applications that are on-premise and they'll have some applications in the cloud. And in this example where they've got their core SAP systems, it doesn't really matter where that sits, that is going to be integrated into lots of different other systems. Now this customer in particular said, well, we've got a number of systems that sit out on the cloud, they're sort of SaaS offerings. And every 3 months or so we will get told that we're going to get an update, they're going to make a patch, or we're going through an upgrade. And there's not really much flexibility to postpone, delay, or set when that date will be. It just happens. And they thought they are a very large global organization, that they would be in control of that. And actually they're not. So their second thought was, fine, SAP, whoever's hosting the SaaS application, will be doing the testing for it. They're going to make the changes, they'll test it, it'll all be fine. And that premise is fine if that system sits in isolation. But again, the integrated nature of these systems means that SAP or Salesforce, or whoever it is, cannot validate your specific integration points, your specific customizations that you've got. So they were then sitting there scratching their head saying, we've got all of our changes that we're in control of, that we're flowing through, and we need to test. So we've got changes from the business, we've got our own on-premise applications we're changing, enhancements we're making, and we're just about keeping our head above water for those. We've then got these evergreen changes coming from our other providers, and we've got to test those as well. So suddenly our testing effort is significantly increasing. And combined to that, if I've got 2 or 3 of the SAP solutions that are coming through that route, they're not going to be all lined up and making the changes at the same time. They're all on a different time scale. So suddenly we're just getting constant testing requirements, testing. And it's all about the integration and the complexities I've got around my own customer-specific configurations. So what do we start doing about that? We can't just keep testing everything every time. We don't have the budget, and we don't have the bandwidth. We don't have the time to do that. So we need to look at how we can optimize what we're doing, how we can test in a much smarter, targeted fashion. So there's really sort of 5 key areas that we look at with customers. So one is around risk. How do you know what to test? We don't want to test everything. We don't want to use this blanket approach. We want to be really targeted. We want to use some risk techniques to really know where we've got to dig deep and scratch under the surface versus areas that maybe we can do a lighter touch. We also want to balance that with how much time and how much cost we've got, and maybe what risk we're prepared to take in terms of quality. If there's less of an impact, maybe we can take a slightly lighter touch approach to testing. If we know it's going to impact our customers, we want to make sure we get it right. Automation, touched on that in the challenges section. So the ability to be able to test our entire core business processes within minutes. Not hours, not days or weeks, but within minutes. And finding a way that the maintenance doesn't break the bank in terms of how we're keeping it alive. Performance, dropping that into short, small, efficient blocks, and ultimately having that form part of our regression. So we talk about functional regression. Actually, our regression pack should consist of performance. So we're constantly doing tests and checks and making sure that performance isn't degrading. Security, hot topic, lots of people talking about it, but actually what are we doing about it from an application security perspective, and also what happens about data. So I'm from the UK, we've got GDPR coming in, which is going to impact all of our customers, and pretty much all of our customers are global customers, so it has a wider reaching effect than just the UK. And actually data that sits within these systems is the big problem. And then the analytics side, so how do we shift left, how do we improve, how do we use all this data to accelerate what we're doing. So I'll just dip into those topics a little bit more. So no doubt you'll have seen a number of different risk-based techniques out there, and people using risk-based testing to actually target what's going on. I think it's underused, and it's also a relatively immature area in that it can be used quite easily, but actually with not necessarily great effect. Getting a risk-based approach right is absolutely critical. So we need to be looking at, what is the risk, which will be based on my industry sector that I'm in, type of organisation that I'm in, obviously the nature of the changes that are coming through. What's my time? What's my cost? What quality are we aiming for? We should be using that information not just as a one-off exercise to say, well, how critical is this to the business for impacting this business process area? How important is it? What's the impact of failure? What's the technical challenges? Is it likely to go wrong? Is it, again, high risk if we're doing that? But we should be using that information constantly, and we should be able to integrate. There's a number of tools out there for different technologies. Some of these change impact tools that will give us a technical viewpoint on what's being impacted. But if any change that's coming through, however big or small, we're using all this information and keeping it up to date, we can be really targeted about what we do. And should any projects that people work on be challenged in terms of time, things start slipping, testing sits towards the end, we need to be able to adapt. We need to be able to make the right decisions when a project is in flight or a phase is in flight, to be able to adapt and say, well, are we prepared to take a slightly different risk profile if it means we can still hit our dates? So all of this should be dynamic, and it should be really sitting at the heart of any test manager's toolkit and any test team's toolkit for absolutely everything that's coming through. The sort of things that automation should do is really the challenges that we see time and time again. So is your automation truly lights out? Will it run without human interaction? Will it manage all of the data preparation? One of the big gaps that we often see is that there are preparation steps required before anyone can actually execute their regression packs, and actually it shouldn't. It should be able to either go and data mine for information, it should be able to set up or create master data if it needs to, and it certainly should be managing all of the transactional data that's flowing through our tests. If we achieve our zero human interaction, then we can start to tackle grid execution. So by this I mean setting up large numbers of machines that we can run our tests from. So we may be running hundreds of tests, but if we're running off a number of different machines, then our execution window is going to come significantly down, which is going to allow us to embed it into, if we're going down DevOps, or even if we're just trying to test in as rapid fashion as possible, the sort of regression schedule that we need to start achieving. There should also be an element of self-maintenance. So what happens when things change, when things go wrong for whatever reason? We're not spending ages fixing it. You should not need to have a huge automation team that's keeping this stuff alive. Our packs also should be flexible. So if they're flexible, we've got a change coming down, do we need to run the whole thing? Well, if we've achieved grid execution and we can do the whole suite in a matter of minutes, then maybe we do. But until that point, we need to be able to pick and choose chunks of our pack, again, based on how critical the changes coming through are, which business area it's being focused, the changes are being focused on. The other thing that we can do if we've got that flexibility is we can start testing earlier. So if we're using this as a regression pack, where are we using it? Yes, we want to validate as a sort of traditional regression phase, but as developers are making some changes, we can be using these packs very, very early on to validate the quality that's coming across. We can also be using these packs to pipe clean environments. If we've got that complex landscape, all these different integration points, and a new environment has been stood up for us or it's been refreshed, we should be using these packs to validate that everything's working before any manual activity happens. So they should be adaptable to multiple different purposes. And then finally, it's about the reporting element of it. Often I see outputs from automation and it's not stakeholder ready. And by stakeholder ready, I mean, yes, it needs to report into what the test manager needs to see, but there's stakeholders that sit above that. And some of those stakeholders are technical, whilst others are from the business. So we need to have different dimensions of the information to play back to the different audience that we've got. As a business owner, I want to know, are we okay to go or no go? And I need that information presented in a business way, and we should have that enhanced reporting inbuilt within the logs that we get produced. Analytics. We have lots of stats that we're picking up on. There's different test tools that I'm sure you're all using, and invariably the analytics that get contained within them natively, for my mind, don't really hit what we need. And there's different types of stats that we want to be looking at. Some of it is from a test management perspective, but actually a lot of it is about where are my bottlenecks. As testers, we have a wealth of information that we see. There's multiple different people that get involved, not just from the test team, and actually the information contained within it will give us a health check on the overall, the change, the project, whatever we're working on as to what's going on. It will give us a health around the quality of development. It will give us a health check around the quality of requirements, the information the business is feeding through. It will give us a health check in terms of the sort of issues that are being raised, and we should be able to use that information to help us shift left. So one of the things that we always do, and I encourage anyone to do, is to use some proper business intelligence style analytics to actually extract the information from whatever test tools you're doing, which may be only a spreadsheet, or it may be something like ALM or JIRA, and actually do some proper analysis that comes out of it. And there's various templates and dashboards that we use to do that. Performance, which is a particular favourite of mine. I mentioned at the beginning that I started my career as basis and got into performance tuning, but so often underused. So performance really for me is about research. It's not like some of the other testing areas. It's not ticking boxes in terms of does it pass or fail. We have shades of grey, and there's good performance, there's terrible performance, and there's performance that isn't as good as it could be, but the business are prepared to accept it. The challenge with it is tools can be expensive unless you're able to go open source, and with a lot of the enterprise applications we can't go open source. And it's incredibly complex. So if we are trying to set up scenarios that take on different user activities, transactions within multiple systems, if we're integrating across those systems, if we've got batch jobs that are running daytime and nighttime, it becomes a big exercise. As part of setting up performance, rather than it being a one-stop big hit, we may have the opportunity to do that as part of a big program, but we should be building it much the same way with automation, block by block, and it should be reusable, repeatable. Again, it should manage all of its data, or we create data packs to get things set up in a hands-off mode, but ultimately we start to integrate that into our regression testing platform. The most important bit around performance for me, which we very rarely see, is it's not about running the tests, it's about the analysis and analytics that go into it. So in terms of whatever teams you have that are doing performance, are they running tests and reporting on end user response times or server response times, or are they actually getting into the application statistics, whether it's SAP, whether it's Java-based apps, doesn't really matter, but getting under the hood and actually producing good quality analytics. The good quality analytics are needed to obviously do some tuning and pinpoint where issues are, but if we're embedding this into a regression suite, then we need those analytics firstly to baseline the test environments that we're using to make sure the results are valid that are coming out of it. We need to make sure that the tests that we're running are valid, so that if we're running on a test environment that may only be a scaled down version, but we should be able to compare results and the volumes and the activities that are going through those systems with what is happening in their current production environment if they're already live. And the example I use on that one is a customer that we worked with who wanted, it was an SAP set of SAP environments, but they wanted to see the number of short dumps they were getting, the number of errors they were getting within our tests, because they knew they hadn't fixed those issues. So if a number of different counters, and this short dump counter was out of sync, didn't look like production, then they knew that our tests weren't valid. So it's about picking up and making sure that we've got good quality testing going on. And then the final dimension to it is if we're testing, if we're integrating it as part of a performance regression pack, we can track these metrics over time and start to see where these minute shifts in performance will happen. It's very rarely that it's just going to go bang. It's going to be a progressive thing. We can start to do the analysis over a protracted period of time to see where those issues start to creep out. Security. Hot topic, as I mentioned earlier, and a big challenge for organisations. When I do talks with SAP, I've actually pinched this off one of the SAP slides, but this is really what they sort of talk about. You know, we deploy, or IT deploys bad software. Something, the development that's been done hasn't actually embedded the right level of security within it. And that's primarily because, certainly historically, developers weren't taught to write secure code. They were taught to write as good code, efficient code, but not necessarily secure code. So if we deploy that, we'll do some kind of pen test and we go, we've got some issues over here. So we pass it back to the same development team that didn't necessarily know how to fix it in the first place, or to write good code in the first place to then fix it. So we end up in a bit of a vicious loop until we start to get things right. And actually, we should be utilizing some of the tools so that we're not just pen testing, we're actually identifying the source of insecure code much, much earlier on in the process. We've also got a data challenge. So everyone talks about hacks coming from the outside, but actually with the sort of landscapes that we're talking about, a lot of the data that's sitting in there is really, really sensitive. So actually the biggest threat is an internal threat, and not necessarily a deliberate internal threat. It can be accidental, but the data that's sitting there is vast, has customer sensitive information, has employee sensitive information, and very rarely does that information get obfuscated across different environments. So, test environments quite often will have full data sets or at least subsets of data that is real data, and that doesn't go through the same rigorous levels of security, the same roles and authorizations that production systems will have. So we need to be looking not just at our production data, but how we're migrating and validating that data into other systems. What is that out-of-date information that's sitting, be it in production systems or test systems, and how we create data for those test systems. So quite often they'll sit there with stale data for not just months but years. So how do we refresh and then have clean, accurate, obfuscated data that's there? Who has access to it? Testers will have typically a wider access set than they would in real life. So with that roles and authorizations piece, again using automation, we can do some really fast validation around have people got the right roles and authorizations. We can test across multiple environments and make sure that we're testing against those roles and authorizations. Some of the biggest or most common issues that fall through when you're applying enhancement packs and things are around roles and authorizations. So specific packs that target that are a good thing. And we want to be able to have that sort of flexible approach to applying that with roles and authorizations. If you use something like SAP GRC, do you do that across all your integrated systems? Are you doing that across your test environments as well? Quite often there's big gaping holes that organizations need to address. And then if we're looking to do some of that testing and looking to do static and dynamic analysis on the code level, where does that set in? So we need to embed that so that it's not just at the end of the process. We're not just pen testing in our production environments, but we're doing it throughout that whole life cycle. So as we're going through our design phases, our requirements phases, we're actually building those non-functional, those security requirements into the test plans that we're building. And we're starting to do our code inspection, that static analysis, as developers are updating or creating their new code. As part of the functional testing, we need to be doing that authorizations and looking at across obfuscated data. And then as we get further throughout our development cycle, we're doing that dynamic analysis, application analysis, using some of the tools that are out there to make sure we've got a secure environment. And then we can continue to do that dynamic analysis when we're live as well. So we're constantly looking for threats. So where do we start with all of this stuff? Well, the place where most organizations start is looking at the various different test tools. And although I've got that first on my list, my last point is please don't start here. There are lots of tools out there, there's lots of great tools out there, and tools are needed to be able to either do some of this testing or certainly to accelerate some of this testing, but really it's about the model, which I'll touch on next. But there are tools, lots of them around change impact analysis, some of which are from SAP themselves, if you're looking at SAP landscapes. but there's also solutions from companies like Panaya around the sort of test management, automation, performance. There are lots of tools out there, and quite often people ask me about open source tools, and open source is great, except they don't work across the entire landscape. And that's where, certainly in the SAP world, you'll see Micro Focus, formerly HP, Worksoft, Tricentis coming into play. But there is a need to use open source just for the scale of some of the wider applications that get used. So what we're now seeing is the integration of open source into some of these tools. So for example, with LoadRunner, you can now use JMeter, and that's embedded, and there's no additional license for LoadRunner needed for that. So if you've got JMeter suites built out, you can integrate the two and have truly sort of integrated enterprise-wide tests that are running. The first place and the highest priority place for me is around the people in your model. And I know this is an age-old topic that people talk about, but we've got to move away from this blanket test approach and just relying on expanding our offshore models. We need to look at how we're building the right support for our offshore teams. We use a lot of offshore ourselves, and building the right kind of structure so we can maximize what we're getting. We need business process expertise. The little example that I've got up there of Greg's, our starting point is understanding what your business is, how does your business work, and how does the technology support the business. Let's not forget the technology stacks that we're building are there to improve and make your businesses more efficient. So we need to come back to that point, and it's quite often business analysts that get involved and get dragged into testing because their skills are absolutely vital. And our test team should be made up of testers, traditional testers, people that can automate, people that can get involved in, whether you're using Agile or DevOps or sort of waterfall methodologies, but also people that have that deep enterprise knowledge. And it's not just about understanding how a sales order is created in a particular system, or in the example that we've got up on the screen, how some raw materials get manufactured into a cake and then sent through to a store. It's really understanding how the data flows within it, what that whole life cycle is. Where do we need to validate things? If things go wrong and are getting blocked in a warehouse, what does it actually mean? So we need that combination of skills. And then the final element to it really is around what is it that we're learning? What are we using that wealth of information that we've got at our fingertips to actually do? We all want to shift left. There's learnings in the bad things as well as the good things. How do we extract that information and use it? And this is where we're really pushing test teams and within our customers, trying to elevate the influence that the test teams have, because they're a crucial part of the process in accelerating what's going on, but also seeing what the health of our projects and programs actually are, and making sure we're presenting back to our stakeholders in the right way, proactively, to help change the way things are working. Everyone wants to do great work. All developers want to produce great code in the fastest time possible, and actually that continual feedback loop is an area which, for my money, is really, really underutilized. So, hopefully you'll have found the information that we've touched on useful. There's a number of topics that we could dig much deeper into, and I'm happy to take any questions if people have any at this point. And I think Sarah mentioned that the content would be sent round, and we're also happy to follow up and have sort of one-on-one conversations and dig in if that's useful for you.
Okay, thanks Chris, that was really informative. So we're at the end of the presentation, so let's go to some questions. Chris, is there some there for you? I'll hand over to you.
Sure. So some of the questions, where should we start? So this is a common question actually that I get asked, which is why is or how is enterprise testing any different from any other form of testing? And it's vastly different in many respects. There's some things that are very similar, but there's sort of different areas. It's really the need to understand all the different possible variations at a business level. So the validation that is required often disappears into different business areas. So being able to understand finance versus how a warehouse works, to understand where costs are posted to, for example, is really where some of the difference starts to come out. And understanding how the data flows across that enterprise landscape, because you'll do something in one part of the business and actually the impact of the data is happening in a completely different area. And that's where we see test teams getting stuck quite often, which is being able to manage and manipulate that data. And without that detailed knowledge, you become dependent on business analysts and other teams, which not only is very inefficient, but starts to cause a lot of frustrations outside of the test team and the support that they're giving. So we always recommend having business analyst level skills within your test team, as well as some of the traditional skills and obviously some of the tool skills that you need for automation, etc. Another question we've got is around performance testing and where we get products like SAP HANA. There's other enterprise vendors that are producing similar speedy analytics and the sort of real-time data that these organizations are talking about. If we've got things that are so wonderfully fast, why would we need to performance test anymore? The simple answer is we do. There are some incredible benefits that we're seeing around the sort of big data space and the HANA space. However, database structures are vastly different and are still changing. There's a lot of recoding to be done. There's a lot of optimization to be done around queries, etc. So poor performing code is poor performing code whether you stick a turbocharged system underneath it. And if you look at any of the online talks or case studies by companies who have moved into these areas, one of the common themes on their sort of lessons learned slides is really that they had not done enough, or they'd underestimated what they needed to do around the performance piece. And then the final question we've got here is some organizations provide pre-written test scripts. Should we be taking advantage of these? And obviously you should be if they provide real value and efficiency in what you're doing around testing. Some of the enterprise vendors themselves are starting to provide pre-written test scripts as well, and that's great if you are vanilla, but I don't really know any organizations at a large enterprise level that have vanilla systems. So then you spend a lot of time rewriting or adjusting the scripts themselves based on your unique setup, combination of solutions, etc. And those variations are limitless. So the scripting, whether it is manual or automated, is really the easy bit if you understand how the business processes are flowing, how the data is flowing, etc., etc. So quite often we see little value in those pre-built scripts. Not always. It's about picking the right thing for the right piece. And I think with that, Sarah, we've got, that's all the questions.
Brilliant. Thanks very much. So our webinar has now concluded. Thank you once again to our presenter today, Simon Evans, and to you for attending and for your questions. We hope you can join us next time. So until then, thank you very much and goodbye.